So, Skip, what was your takeaway from the end of The Last Dance last night and what you heard?
Jenny, it made me even sicker than I was at the end of the 1998 season when I was there watching The Last Dance from the inside out as the columnist for the Chicago Tribune. I told Jenny and Shannon on Friday's show that I had made a video that we posted yesterday in which I suspected that Phil Jackson was the real villain of The Last Dance. He called it The Last Dance because it was his last dance, and it should not have been Michael Jeffrey Jordan's last dance. Everybody in Chicago called Phil the Zen Master, but even late in the 98 season, I referred to him in print as the Spin Master. And when I heard what Jenny just referred to at the end of the documentary last night, I fell out of my chair onto the floor. This was a bombshell. This did incriminate Phil Jackson as the real villain, not Jerry Krause, Phil Jackson. I had lengthy one-on-one interviews with both Phil and Jerry late in that season in Chicago. And I walked away from my interview with Phil not trusting him at all in this sort of Svengali hold, this way that he could hypnotize Michael Jordan and get him to do what Phil wanted to do. So we heard the bombshell last night, never been reported, that Jerry Reinsdorf overruled Jerry Krause, his GM, went to Phil after that sixth and what became final championship and said, "Hey, Phil, I want you to come back." After Jerry Krause had opened the season by telling the media Phil could go 82-0 and he ain't coming back. The owner, thank you gods, came to his senses, overruled the GM and said, "Phil, you've got to come back." And Phil said, "No, I'm done, Jerry Reinsdorf. I need some time away." So I told you, Shannon, on Friday that even though Phil kept saying all along that trail in the playoffs, Michael's had enough. He's burned out. His tank is empty. He needs to walk away now. When I asked Michael about that quote from Phil, I asked him this one-on-one, he rather coldly answered, "That's Phil's opinion." And I thought, okay, good. Maybe that means you're going to come to your senses, Michael, and come back without Phil Jackson. So here's what I can't, this is, Shannon, for me, the complete and utter sad, sorry disconnect. Why didn't Michael ever have any dialogue with Jerry Reinsdorf after the season was over? He said last night at the end of The Last Dance, Michael Jordan said, "We had no dialogue." Why did he fall for Phil Jackson's spin master ploy that let's have a grieving ritual. Let's all come together at the end as a team and let's all write down our thoughts about how much we loved each other. Michael even wrote, they said, a poem. Let's read it to each other in a circle, and then let's throw it into a trash can and light it on fire and burn it so we can all grieve it and let it go. What are you talking about? Let what go? I'm convinced Phil Jackson already had some kind of handshake deal with the Lakers. There was already Shaq and very young Kobe, and Phil took 1 year off, and then suddenly he was back in business, back right in the saddle, coaching Shaq and Kobe to 3 straight championships in Los Angeles, while Michael Jordan sat out the final 3 years of his prime, ages 35, 36, and 37. Why, Michael, didn't you wake up and go to Reinsdorf and say, you know, the truth is we don't need Phil. We saw it again and again in this documentary. The motivator for this team, really the ultimate head coach of this team, wasn't Phil Jackson. It was Michael Jordan. So all that baloney about Krause having fallen in love with Tim Floyd at Iowa State, forget it. Why couldn't Michael have gone to Reinsdorf and said, hey, Jerry, let's go get a real coach, somebody with experience. Let's go back to Doug Collins. That was his coach, obviously, for 3 years pre-Phil Jackson. And obviously, Michael ended up taking Doug Collins with him to Washington in the end. Why not do that? And so Michael is saying, it's maddening we didn't get a chance to run it back. Well, it's maddening because you didn't seize the opportunity to say, this Phil Jackson stuff's a bunch of phony baloney, a bunch of hocus pocus. But no, he had some weird kind of hold, and Michael talked about it at the end. He could get you to believe just anything. He could pull you into just about anything when it would involve the team. Well, why? That team, as Michael said, would have all come back if Michael said, I'm coming back. I believe Scotty, everybody would have come back on one-year deals. That team was not too old. The Knicks won the East the next year without Patrick Ewing. My Spurs won the shortened season. It was a lockout season championship, and that was pre-Tony Parker, pre-Manu, pre-obviously Kawhi Leonard. They would have won again. I think they would have won 2 championships, and in the end, it left me sickened and saddened that Michael's own documentary actually unwittingly exposed Michael as being naive to this whole situation, Shannon, and he got spun by the spin master and spun right out of town into retirement.
Skip, I can understand why you and others that were so infatuated with the Bulls, and although you covered, you have a soft spot in your heart for Michael Jordan and the Bulls. But I don't believe one word that Jerry Reinsdorf said. You know why? Because this is the New England Patriots situation. If Coach Belichick and Mr. Kraft had wanted Tom Brady back, why did you sign him? Why did you only give him $8 million? Why not give him an extension of 2 to 3 years? When you took your butt to Montana and you talked to Phil and said, Phil, come back for 1 year, why did you only offer him a 1-year deal? If you really wanted him back, why not give him a 2? Why not give him a 3-year deal? Skip, Phil Jackson knew he was not sticking around for a rebuild. Jerry Krause also said, Steve Kerr, Ron Harper, and others, their market value wasn't worth that to us. He was not bringing them back, and they were not coming back on a 1-year deal. That's very convenient for Michael Jordan to say, yeah, they'd come back on a 1-year deal. That's easy for you to say because you're making $36 million on a 1-year deal. You're making $40 million a year from Nike on that 1-year deal. But hold on. What about these other guys? Scottie Pippen had been vastly underpaid for the last 6 years. Scottie Pippen was not coming back on a 1-year deal. Scottie Pippen had been underpaid for such a long time. Scottie needed to get paid. At that point in time, Skip, once you win 1, 2, 3 rings, what's the 4th one? There are only 2 people another ring would have really helped. And it would only help one guy, Scottie Pippen, if he won Finals MVP. Everybody else stood nothing to gain. Was that going to get Steve Kerr in the Hall of Fame? Is that the reason why Steve Kerr got a head coaching job? Ron Harper, Tony Kukoc, Luke Longley, was any of those guys going to get in the Hall of Fame if they got a 4th ring? Absolutely not. So therefore, at that point in time, and we see it a lot with football players, after I win 1 or 2 rings, there's no sense in me standing around for a 3rd. Let me go get that big payday, secure my family for perpetuity, and make generations well off. So, Skip, for me, Jerry Reinsdorf, that's very convenient because he knew Phil Jackson was not going to come part of a rebuild. And Jackie Mack said in the first series, she noticed Tim Floyd hanging around 96, 97. What the hell is another coach hanging around your team for in 96 and 97, Skip? Jerry Reinsdorf knows how this comes off. For 20 years, Skip, before this documentary came out, everybody painted Jerry Krause as the villain. Jerry Krause broke it up. Jerry Krause broke it up. But as we started delving into it and got a little deeper, we realized Jerry Krause didn't own the team. Jerry Krause did Jerry Reinsdorf bidding for him. Jerry Reinsdorf, when he went to Montana and signed Phil Jackson for that 1-year deal, he could say, Phil, we're going to keep this thing together for, at the bare minimum, 2 years. 2 years. That's what we're going to do. But he didn't do that. He let Jerry Krause all year long. He could go 82-0. This thing is not coming back. Not one time did Jerry Krause say, hold on, wait a minute now. We haven't made the final decision. Why would he even allow Jerry Krause to say that? He could have said, look, we're going to reevaluate this thing after the season. This is a big season for us. It'll be the second of our three-peats, and everybody's going to be, I'm sure, going to be exhausted. But we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. Jerry Reinsdorf never once in the entire 98 season said, hold on, guys, wait a minute. We're going to see how this thing plays out, and then we'll circle back and get back to you at a later date and time. Skip, he was not going to re-sign Scotty. Scotty was not going to sign a one-year deal after being 5 years underpaid. And Skip, that's the same thing what we're seeing with Dak. $33 million is a lot of money for 1 year, no question. But Dak says, I want 4 years. I want 5 years. So why would I accept a one-year deal when I need a 4 or 5 year deal? And so that's what you're asking these guys to do. Give up market value, 3, 4 year deals to take a 1 year deal for another ring. Another ring is not going to change my life. But $5, $6, $7 million a year compared to a $3 million, nah, Skip. So I do not believe a word Jerry Reinsdorf is saying. I believe, Skip, this is wishful thinking. I think he's having buyer's remorse. I guess you can't have seller's remorse. He sold something, Skip, that he wants now. No, bro. And realizing, Skip, Jerry Krause did convince him, oh, I can rebuild this thing. Oh, it's because, Skip, remember, it was organizations. Organizations win titles, not players. It's organizations. And he convinced Jerry Reinsdorf, Jerry Krause, the general manager, I can rebuild this thing. And guess what? They've been picking in the lottery ever since. So I do not believe Jerry Reinsdorf. I do not believe they were bringing this thing back because they could have nipped that in the bud by giving him a 2 or 3 year extension when he took his butt to Montana to begin with.
There's nothing not to believe, Shannon. He said it, and Phil corroborated it last night in the documentary. We know that Jerry Reinsdorf said, I came to my senses after they won 6 in a row, because as he said in episode 1, Jerry Reinsdorf, he had let Krause convince him this team was too old. It was hitting the wall. So Jerry Reinsdorf went into the last year with Phil Jackson on a 1 year because he did not think they could go win a 6th championship and 3rd in a row. And as he said last night, and by the way, I was shocked in the beginning with episode 1 that Jerry Reinsdorf even sat down for this documentary. But the reason he did, he wanted to exonerate himself, and in turn, the late Jerry Krause, who obviously couldn't defend himself, he's no longer with us, God rest his soul. But the point was he wanted to take both Jerrys off the hook because he did come to his senses. He did call Phil right after the 6th championship was won and say, hey, I didn't see this coming. Let's do it again next year. I offer you a 1 year deal, and he was prepared to offer everybody else at least a 1 year deal. I believe they could have paid Scottie Pippen because they could have mixed and matched all kinds of spare parts on a team that was top heavy as bleep, as LeBron once said of his Cavaliers. It was not a deep basketball team. All those Steve Kerrs and Will Perdue's and Joe Klein's and Judd Buechlers, you could mix and match any or all of those. And by the way, they did have a chance. They did woo Tracy McGrady, who was then a young player, like in his 3rd year, and was a free agent. If in dire need, you could have probably signed Tracy McGrady if, in fact, Michael had stayed. But Phil told Reinsdorf, I don't want to rebuild, because he knew he had already talked Michael into walking into the sunset with him. That's all you need to know. They were going to have no chance. There's no way Scotty or Ron Harper or Rodman are going to come back with no Jordan. But if Jordan says, yes, I'll come back because I like the next coach, it doesn't have to be Phil. It could have been, as I said, Doug Collins, could have been any made man in the NBA who'd want to come coach them one more time. I think they could have won 2 more in a row to make it 5 in a row. But the point was, there's nothing not to believe, because Reinsdorf did offer, and Phil agreed last night on the documentary. Yes, he offered me a deal. They blew the whole Tim Floyd thing right out of the water, because he could have said, yes, I'll come back. But to do that, he would have had to swallow his crow. He hated Jerry Krause, and he wanted to stick it to Krause by being able to Svengali Michael Jordan right out of town and leave them high and dry. And they were left high and dry. Tim Floyd had 3 straight terrible years and then got fired in the 4th year.
A lot of other people had some terrible years there, with the exception of Tibbs, and then Tibbs had run afoul with him. But Skip, hold on, wait a minute. The strongest guy that had the strongest mind, the strongest mentality, got spun by Phil Jackson. So this don't jive now.
He did.
Now, one or two things. Hey, no. Not a man that has that indomitable will. Not a man that has that serious. No. Now all of a sudden, somebody can run game on Michael Jordan. When I've heard you and everybody else said Michael Jordan has the strongest mind ever, he got spun by a guy that wasn't even on the court. Skip, my thing is that why would you allow? Okay, you know you're going on this journey. Why would I wait until the middle of the trip to realize that I don't have a spare? Because that's what they did. They went all the way down the road, letting Jerry Krause say this is the end. Not one time did Jerry Reinsdorf says, hold on, wait a minute. They asked him. He didn't say during the season. At no point in time during the season did I ever hear, and I remember it because I was old enough to remember it. I was 30. Did I hear Jerry Reinsdorf says, oh, hold on, wait a minute, guys. This is a bit premature. We'll see how this thing plays out, and then we'll go from there. All he did was he perpetuated. No, Skip. No. Don't tell. Hold on.
He was waiting to see if they won or not. He was shocked they won a 6th championship. Same
thing with Mr. Kraft. Had they wanted Tom Brady would still be in New England, because instead of just giving him $8 million on last year's contract, they would have gave him a 2-year extension. That's not what they did. Now, after the fact, now when Tom Brady is about to leave, we want you, Tom. Once they realized that Phil Jackson was going to walk out the door and take Michael with him, now we want you. Phil said, no, I'm out. Plus, he also said, Skip, he said, I thought that would be very, very unfair to Jerry Krause, because, Skip, they sincerely and genuinely disliked each other, because both guys wanted credit. Maybe, like you said, maybe Michael deserved all the credit, but you have to give Phil some credit, because before Phil got there, that team wasn't winning squadouche. So we can say, well, Doug Collins might have got him over the hump, but he didn't. Phil Jackson got them over the hump. Just like the same thing with Shaq and Kobe. You could have said, anybody didn't do it, because Shaq and Kobe had other coaches before Phil, and none of them got it done. Phil got it done. So give Phil his due. No matter how important of a role you thought he played a significant role, and he got it done. Jerry Reinsdorf, all of a sudden, I went to Phil. You should have you had Phil in Montana. Why not give him a 2-year extension? Hold on. What you mean you didn't believe it done? You got Michael Jordan.
Jerry Krause.
Go ahead.
Jerry Krause had convinced Jerry Reinsdorf, we're too old, we're hitting the wall. And then Jerry Reinsdorf realized, my GM misled me. He screwed up. He misread how old we are. All those players went on. Scotty played 7 more years. Steve Kerr played 5 more. Rodman played 2 more. I'm sorry, Ron Harper won 2 more championships with the Lakers. All those guys could have played at least 2 more years. So let me ask you this question. What do you think would have happened if Michael had called Jerry Reinsdorf and said, hey, Jerry, please go get me another coach, somebody with NBA experience. Maybe Doug Collins, I don't know, maybe Greg Popovich, for that matter, who had not yet won a championship in San Antonio. Whoever he could have gotten, even elevating one of the assistants. I love Frank Hamlin. People don't know who he is. He was Phil's #1 assistant that year. Let's even elevate him into the head coaching chair, because it didn't matter who the head coach was, as long as it wasn't Tim Floyd from the Iowa State Cyclones. That's the one who wouldn't work for Michael Jordan. So my point is, what would have happened, Shannon? What if Michael had some, as he said, dialogue with Reinsdorf and said, just go get me another made man coach, just somebody with some NBA clout? What would have happened?
Well, Skip, that's easy to say. That's 2 decades ago. So it's really hard for me to honestly say what would have happened. But what I gathered is that Michael Jordan and Jerry Reinsdorf really never had any dialogue. The only dialogue that I saw that came through in the documentary, Skip, is that when Michael Jordan says he wants to play baseball, and because Jerry Reinsdorf owned the White Sox, that was a no-brainer for him. other than that, Skip, I can't see a situation where I ever heard Michael Jordan and the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, really having dialogue. So at this juncture, Michael's like, why am I having dialogue with you now? And so I think that's how he left it, Skip, for me. That's what I gathered. Now, I could be wrong. You were there, and there were others there. But I don't remember a situation in the documentary, this 10-part series, where they ever said Michael Jordan and Jerry had dialogue. I guess when it came to contract, David Falk handled that in, and Jordan played basketball. But when it came for him to retire, and he says, I want to try my hand at baseball, well, the White Sox, because the owner of the Bulls owned the White Sox, so for me, it was a no-brainer. So I am not surprised that Michael Jordan didn't have dialogue with Jerry Reinsdorf, because he had never had dialogue, with the exception of that one occasion that I can deduce from everything that I saw last night.
Okay, and that is a good point, and I agree with that premise. They had no relationship before. So, and you brought up David Falk. Maybe it was up to David Falk to try to moderate the situation, try to be the referee here.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe he should have talked to Jerry Reinsdorf. What I expected last night, Shannon, I thought Michael would sit there and drop his head and say, you know, the truth was Phil was right. I was burned out. My tank was empty, and I was done. I thought he would give in to the premise that it was the last dance, but that's not what we got. We got Michael Jeffrey Jordan saying we could have won 7. I think he believes they could have won 8. And for him to say that everybody would have come back and that it's maddening for him to this day to think about it is devastating for me. You know, I'm his biggest fan. It got, what's the basic premise of all of sports, Shannon, is if you win a championship, you get to defend it. It's like the essence of competition. They got it jerked out from underneath them. They didn't get a chance to defend when Michael wanted to defend his title at least one more time, and I believe all of them, because I thought that was one of the, again, I told you it was the greatest defensive team. It was a juggernaut, and if they'd won a couple of more, you could have started making the case they were the greatest dynasty in the history of sports. So that's why it tears my guts out today to think about it didn't have to be this way. Phil led them down a path right out the back door and into the sunset.
Well, Skip, I think the thing is that you covering sports for 40 years and me playing, the biggest thing that you can have in sports is regret. And I think Michael Jordan has regret now, looking back 2 decades, that we should have been given the opportunity. Skip, I still believe that he holds Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause responsible. He does not blame Phil. He says, because you guys started this ball rolling down the hill, because you started this, he could go, because he said it, Skip. He said, they said he could go 82-0 and Phil wasn't coming back. He made sure he mentioned that. So at no point in time leading up until the end and winning the title, did you ever try to clarify that we were premature? That's not what he done. And so, Skip, I believe that's one of the reasons Michael Jordan came back, even after 3 years, because that itch, because most athletes will tell you, Skip, there's nothing you'll be able to do in life that can replace the competition that you had in your said sport. And that's why Mike came back. Deep down in his mind, he believed he could have won a title with Washington, Skip. That's why he came back. He really believed that he could.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here to get the latest from the show, and be sure to check out more of the best clips from Undisputed, or go watch a few other segments from our other shows on FS1.